So we'll discuss the unique character of the day of Tisha B'Av. Its dual and double character. Because on one hand, as we'll see, Tisha B'Av is similar to Yom Kippur. In fact, many people think it's very similar. They don't realize they're fundamentally different because functionally they look the same because we can't eat and we're not wearing leather shoes. Really, Tisha B'Av,
the same
Inuyim, but Tisha B'Av we know is the saddest day on the Jewish calendar, while Yom Kippur is the happiest day on the Jewish calendar. We get forgiven for our sins and we get to start new. So on one hand, it's not totally wrong. There is a comparison between Tisha B'Av and Yom Kippur, as the Gemara tells us in Psachim 54b. The Gemara says, Ein ben Yom Kippur l'Tisha B'Av. The only difference between Yom Kippur and Tisha B'Av, it's not necessarily the only difference, but the only difference between Yom Kippur and Tisha B'Av is Sveiko Asar v'Sveiko Mutter. That the only difference, and basically they're similar, the only difference is what the Gemara is saying here anyway, is the Yom Kippur is biblical, so we go with the general principle. When you have a doubt regarding something on Yom Kippur, Savik D'Oraisa L'Chumra, a doubt by a biblical law is strict. When it comes to Tisha B'Av, which is D'Rabbanan, which itself is a question, but the Gemara here calls Tisha B'Av D'Rabbanan. So Tisha B'Av D'Rabbanan, Sveiko Mutter. So that's the Gemara. So the point I'm making here, besides the technical details, the Gemara is we see from a general picture, the Gemara is equating Tisha B'Av and Yom Kippur. So on one hand, they're both similar and they both have a din of a tiny sibor. They're both considered like public fast days. On the other hand, as we'll see, and we'll bring proofs to both sides, but on the other hand, the Gemara tells us in Tainus 30a, Kol mitzvahs hanohegetz ba'avel nohegetz b'Tisha B'Av. All the laws, or many of the laws that apply to an avel, to a mourner, apply on Tisha B'Av, or I should say, so the point being is the Gemara equates Tisha B'Av to a day of Avelis, to a day of mourning. So we're going to see this dual aspect of Tisha B'Av. I'll show you different halachas highlighting each aspect. That on one hand, Tisha B'Av is a tiny sibor like Yom Kippur. On the other hand, we're going to find halachas of Tisha B'Av that you won't have on Yom Kippur because of the additional element of Avelis that we find on Tisha B'Av, which we don't find on Yom Kippur. As we'll see, as Rav Soloveitchik pointed out, that the 3 weeks is like the 12-month period, the 9 days is like Shloshim, and Tisha B'Av is like Shiva. So even within Shiva, we know Tisha B'Av is 1 day. So which part of Shiva is it? Because we find the first couple of days, the first 3 days of Bechi. I mean, today practically they're pretty similar and we don't have it, but back in the day, it was a much more, first 3 days were much more intense. As the only family went, it was known as Shosha Lebechi, the first 3 days for crying, the next days for comfort. In other words, they both applied to equally, but in terms of how it was practically filled out. So in fact, it's an interesting discussion which could be relevant to this issue. It's the concept of wearing tefillin on Tisha B'Av, or I should say, or the concept of not wearing Tisha B'Av, not wearing tefillin on Tisha B'Av. So the question is, does an avel wear tefillin?
An avel?
Someone who's in mourning.
Wears tefillin?
Yes.
Yeah. All the time?
Well, not before the only.
No, then he's an only. He's an only.
Right, that's Aninas, right. So Aninas, he doesn't do anything. One of the things you don't do because you're exempt from mitzvahs is you don't wear tefillin among other things. But if I'm asking from after the kvura, after the burial, so there's a concept of, it's a discussion anyway, Avelis Yom Rishon, whether an Avel on Yom Rishon, when they come back from the funeral, whether he puts, let's say, comes back 2 o'clock in the afternoon, whatever the case may be. There's discussion on that first day. It gets into, maybe some say only if you have the Kfura and the Misa on the same day, which we rarely have here in Israel. It's a common occurrence. But there's a discussion. There is a concept of an Avel not wearing tefillin Yom Rishon, whether, when we apply, when we don't, a separate share. Because it says by Pe'er, by tefillin, is the glory, the tefillin are like the crowns, and on Avelis isn't a time to be celebrating. So there's a concept of not wearing tefillin during Avelis, at least Avelis Yom Rishon. So there's an interesting machlokas Rishonim on whether you wear tefillin on Tisha B'Av at all. Our minhag is we have a compromise. We do it in the afternoon. We put it on after Chatzos, but that's machlokas Rosham Maram Rurenberg, whether there's a chiyuv to put on, whether it's mutter to, whether you have a chiyuv or whether it's mutter to put on tefillin on Tisha B'Av. It seems to be the issue is what type of. Everyone agrees Tisha B'Av you're an Avel. The question is what if you're Avel Yom Rishon, so then maybe you don't put on tefillin then. But if you're an Avel, the rest of Shiva you do. So exactly which part of Tisha B'Av, and someone maybe the first, maybe until Chatzos, you compare to the first couple of days of Tisha B'Av. After Chatzos, we lighten it up. So that issue, whether you wear tefillin on Tisha B'Av, has to do with what status of Avelis, how far does Avelis go when we say Tisha B'Av as a din of Avelis, like how Shiva, how exact is it or not? So we're going to see different examples where Tisha B'Av is compared to a tiny Sibor. And so on one hand we see the Kriyas HaTorah we read Tisha B'Av morning has to do with it from Dvarim. V'shavta ad Hashem Elokecha. We see this in the topic is the essence of tshuva. It talks about tshuva, which is one of the themes of Yom Kippur. So Yom Kippur, again, we see on one hand the comparison between Tisha B'Av and Yom Kippur. On the other hand, we read the Haftorah Sof HaSifim, which is about Knesset Yisrael, about the Avelos, the mourning, about the downtrodden. So again, we see from the Kriyas HaTorah, we see the aspect of the comparison to Yom Kippur, a concept of tshuva. On the other hand, from the Haftorah, we see a concept of the Avelos. And in fact, as I point out, there are things, as the Meiri writes in Yuma 78a, there are parts of Tisha B'Av because of the Avelos that were stricter on Tisha B'Av than we are on, even though Tisha B'Av can only be D'Rabbanan and Yom Kippur is D'Oraisa, because of the element of because of the element of Avelis that we restricted. So for instance, there are different, let's say the issue of not eating and drinking on Tisha B'Av, that has to do with the tiny seaboard. That has to do like with Yom Kippur. We don't eat and drink on a tiny seaboard. But different halachas of Tisha B'Av, let's say sitting on the ground, that has nothing to do with Yom Kippur. Yom Kippur we sit on chairs. That's the din of Avelis, of sitting on a low chair. Or the issur of learning Talmud Torah, the prohibition of learning Torah. That is, there's specific parts you're permitted to learn, the Dvarim, Harayim, the things that of Eov, different parts, Hilchas Avelis, the not happy parts of Torah per se. So that's clearly a din in Avelis. It's not a din in Yom Kippur, because Yom Kippur you're allowed to learn. But the Minchas Chinuch raises is the prohibition of washing. He says, on one hand, that shows that's something which applies to both. On one hand, on a tiny sibor, you don't do rechitza either, Tisha B'Av. On the other hand, an Avel also doesn't wash himself. So, which halachas do they apply to? So, the Minchas Chinuch says we see there's a difference between an issur rechitza by a tainus. That's even on mixas gufa. On Yom Kippur, you're not even supposed to wash your pinky and stuff. But al Avelis, the issur isn't called gufo. The issur is only called gufo. You're allowed to wash your hands and face in Avelis. Again, whether you could take on the books, you don't take a shower. But today, everyone could be an istinus, so it could be okay anyway. But I'm just saying, strictly on the books, there's a difference in the severity by an avel and by a tainus. So even within the same isurim, you have regarding a tainus, they apply one way. Regarding avelis, they apply another way. Jeff?
So, look, this question of washing, I thought the issue was, must be wrong, say, Tisha B'Av, you mustn't enjoy yourself at all, and washing washing your face can be pleasurable. Yom Kippur, it's okay to wash faces as long as you don't get it near your mouth. You know, it's a different
No, it's both.
emphasis.
But the Minchas Chinuch is pointing out the Isser Rechitza has both aspects. On one hand, he says you don't. It's a double whammy. You don't wash on Tisha B'Av because on one hand it's a tiny sibor like Yom Kippur, which is one of the things you don't do on a tiny sibor. And in addition, or differently, there's a separate prohibition about a rechitza shel tainug, what's prohibited. That's why the Gemara's example was Rabbi Yehuda ben Levi refrained from wiping his face, hands, and feet with a towel, a practice that was permitted on Yom Kippur. The Gemara's example is. So I'm just saying.
He didn't do it on Tisha B'Av.
On Tisha B'Av. The point being, it's not what is. The point was something he would do on Yom Kippur, but he specifically refrained from doing it because Tisha, because of the Avelos aspect, there was, the Rechitza Shel Tainug, or so therefore it was prohibited.
Because it's pleasurable to
well, that's part of, that's part of the Rechitza on Tisha B'Av that's right, not only Tisha B'Av, the 9 days. It's bathing for pleasure, taking a shower, but to remove the dirt and stuff like that, so then that was never the prohibition.
This discussion is interesting because you're making a comparison between three things, actually. Between Tisha B'Av, Yom Kippur, and Avelos. But no one makes a comparison normally, to my knowledge, between Yom Kippur and Avelos.
Right.
So it's a kind of a two and a half way comparison.
Right, because Yom Kippur, because you can't compare Yom Kippur and Avelos because you can't have Avelos on Yom Kippur.
Exactly.
The polar opposites.
Polar opposites, right.
Yes. Look, could you just sort of back up a bit and get the big picture? Tisha B'Av is a double aspect. One is Avelos, the other is, I think, it's Tshuva. Avelos I can understand, be mourning the temple. Tshuva, the king is in the field in Elul. Why are we doing Tshuva now?
No, it's like a tiny sibor, and it's part of a din of a tiny sibor, not just Yom Kippur. That's the one we have today. But the concept of a tiny sibor in general is to do tshuva, is riboy tefillah. We have slichas, we had to have davening. That's the Yom Kippur happens to be a tiny sibor, but any tiny sibor, the concept is, in fact,
tshuva always goes with a tiny sibor in any case.
Exactly. That's
because it's our fault we lost the temple, right?
Right, and that's that's why we read also. We do we do a Haftorah and Kriyas HaTorah at Mincha on a Tainus, and we do it at Mincha because we're not eating. We get closer to in terms of a true. In fact, that's the kasha of Salvation Gas is what tefillah do we have on Yom Kippur we don't have on Tisha B'Av? What tefillah? What prayer?
Yom Kippur. Mila.
Correct.
Well, Mila.
So tefillah, of course, you don't have Kol Nidri, that's for nothing. That's not really the tefillah of Yom Kippur. That's something that we put. That was a minhag to add before Yom Kippur. But
it has to be before.
What?
You have to do that before.
Yeah. He said tefillah is ne'ilah.
Oh yes.
We have ne'ilah on Yom Kippur. In fact, that's the only day we do it. So we associate tefillah ne'ilah with Yom Kippur, but really, the Mishnah Tainis equates it with any Tainis Sibor. So really, strictly, the question should be, why don't we do it on Tisha B'Av? Tisha B'Av is also a Tainis Sibor. That's what the Rav explained is, Tfilas Ne'ilah is different than Shacharis, Mincha, and Ma'ariv. I mean, different in many ways, but it's fundamentally different in the sense that each of those are independent tefillas. But Tfilas Ne'ilah is a summation of all the tefillas of the day. When you do Ne'ilah, that's why, not that it should happen so often, but that's why the Rav was mocked, but I guess maybe if someone was sick and they didn't daven Shachar, or whatever the case might be, usually you want the person daven Ne'ilah who daven the rest of the day. But this, from a halachic, a legal point of view, he's saying the one leading Tfilas Ne'ilah has to be someone himself who daven Ma'ariv, Shacharis, Musaf, all the prayers, whatever, because it's a summation of all the tefillas, and therefore you have to have davened all the tefillas in order to qualify as the one leading. In other words, Ne'ilah is something, it's riboy tefillah on a tiny sibor. One of the many things we do is, because fasting is supposed to get us closer to God, whether it does or not, that we could discuss. But it's supposed to show you more depend. You know, when you're on a full belly, you know, who cares about God? When you need food, when you have needs, so automatically you turn to God. It's easier to anyway. So the point being is, so Ne'ilah on Yom Kippur and Tiny Sibor, we're adding another tefillah. But on Tisha B'Av, because it's a day of Avelis, it's a day of what they call Sasam Tfilasi. Your tefillahs are closed today, so it doesn't mean literally they're closed, but that's why in the morning of Tisha B'Av, we don't say Tiskabel Sla'asan. There are different things that change from the morning and the afternoon. One is Talis and Tefillin. One is after Chatzos, we sit on chairs. And another one is in Tefillah, we start adding, you accept all our Tefillahs. Since Tisha B'Av is a day of Churban, so in the morning when we're downtrodden, so they took out the word Tiskabel Sla'asan. So it's not a day of Kabbalah. Of course, every day is potentially, but it's more difficult to get it through, so to speak. So therefore, Ne'ilah was specifically the day of the summation of Tefillah, and Tisha B'Av is a day it's a day of Sasam Tfilasi, whatever that means exactly. That's the phrase they use, that your tefillahs, your prayers are closed off. So therefore, that's why we don't say Ne'ilah on Tisha B'Av, because it's not a day of Riboy. It's the opposite of it's a conflict in terms of a tiny Sibor's Riboy Tefillah. This is a day of the opposite. It's a day where we're not cutting down, but it's a day where our tefillahs aren't answered per se, in terms of at least in the morning. So that's what they point out. That's why there's no Ne'ilah, and that's what the Rav pointed out. So on this hand, we see Ne'ilah. This is the Tisha B'Av aspect, that we don't have Ne'ilah, because a tiny Sibor should require us to daven Ne'ilah. And that's what the Rambam points out in Perish HaMishnayos, that we know there's a mitzvah we do every day, or should not every day, but every Yantiv, every Shabbos of Tosefes Shabbos, Tosefes Yantiv. There's a mitzvah of adding to, and of course, I don't mean in the summer where we have colloquial early Shabbos, that's really early Shabbos, but all year round there's a mitzvah in our Torah of adding to our Shabbos, Yantiv, but the halacha where it stems from is Yom Kippur. The Gemara talks about Tosefes Yom Kippurim, that there's a mitzvah to add to Yom Kippur, bring it in early, and a mitzvah to take into a late, to extend it. So that's clear. Everyone agrees by Yom Kippur there's a mitzvah in our Torah of Tosefes Yom Kippurim. That's not debatable. What's debatable in the Gemara and the Rishonim is, what about Tosefes Shabbos and Tosefes Yantiv? We happen to paskin that it's also biblical when we bring in Shabbos early, and when we bring in Yantiv early. See, people have the misconception you can't bring in Yantiv early, because a couple of days a year on Yantiv we don't bring it in early. But those for totally different reasons. Sfira, because it's Tamim is Pesach, because we have to eat it at night. But fundamentally, there's no difference between Shabbos and Yantiv. We paskin there's a biblical mitzvah to bring in Shabbos and Yantiv early. What's interesting is the opinion of the Rambam. The Rambam only brings down the halacha of Tosefes Yom Kippurim. When it comes to Yantif and when it comes to Shabbos, he's quiet on the matter, implying there is no concept of Tosefes Shabbos or Tosefes Yantif. We make Kiddush early according to the Rambam. That's a separate issue. The Rambam sheet is you're supposed to make Kiddush before Shabbos, but you bring in the uniqueness of Shabbos. So there are answers to those questions. But fundamentally, the Rambam doesn't discuss it, so implying he's saying there is no concept of, or at least there is no mitzvah. He doesn't. If you do it, it might work, but there's no chiyuv to bring in Shabbos or Yantiv early. So there's only one other place the Rambam brings in the mitzvah of Tosefes besides Yom Kippur, and you got it. That's Tisha B'Av. The Rambam Perish HaMishnayos, the Tainus, he brings down, just like we have a mitzvah on Yom Kippur to bring it in early and end it later, so to Tisha B'Av we have a mitzvah to bring it in before and then later. So we see the Rambam's concept of Tosefes is obviously different than others, because according to the Rambam, it has nothing to do with Kedushas Hayom, because there is no Kedushas Hayom on Tisha B'Av. There's a concept of Inuyim, so therefore the Rambam Shita is this Tosefes Inoi, that there's a mitzvah to bring in on the days where you have this is comparison to a tiny Sibor. On the days that you have these 5 Inuyim, it used to be more than Tisha B'Av. It could have been made perhaps on the other 4 fast days as well. Today, the only one we have left is Tisha B'Av. So the Rambam writes it only applies to Tisha B'Av and Yom Kippur, which is the days of Tosefes. So we see the Rambam's definition, or the Rambam's understanding of Tosefes, of adding to the day. It has nothing to do with the Kedushas Hayom, because else he would write it by Shabbos and Yontiv. He seems to limit it to Tosefes Inoi, to those days where you have the 5 different Inuyim, the 5 different prohibitions you can't do on a tiny Sibor. He links to that. So we see a link between, so we see the dual character of Tisha B'Av in the sense that on one hand it's linked to the tiny Sibor, on the other hand it's linked to Avelis as well. And that's what they point out, that we know that we're supposed to be misabel the essence of the day, as Chazal, when they give us acts of mourning, when they give us Nihuge Avelis, like we know when a person's sitting Shiva, so the different, you sit on the ground, you cover up the mirrors, the different things to do, as always, especially when it comes to Avelis, it's supposed to elicit emotions inside. So obviously you have to, the reason why the halacha gives you these different halachas is try to create a certain atmosphere that's going to elicit these type of feelings. So a person does different types of acts of Avelis, it's supposed to create a feeling to remember, in one case for your loved one, or during the days of the 3 weeks, 9 days in Tisha B'Av, it's supposed to elicit, issues of the Churban Habayis. And so the question is, many people say, why bother? I mean, if the whole purpose of doing all these things on Tisha B'Av is to elicit feelings of the Churban, it's not working, let me tell you. And therefore, am I just wasting my time then, sitting on the ground, going through the kinos, doing all these things when that person saying it now, whether they're getting something or not, that could discuss. So the two aspects of the two schools of thought on what is the purpose of the Avelis. So according to the Rav school, based on different Rishonim, the ikar of the mourning is to elicit emotion. That's what it's Avelis Belev, and therefore one could argue perhaps that if you're not getting anything out of it, maybe it's not meaningful. On the other hand, Rashi elsewhere in Shas seems to give us a second dimension of Avelis. And also Avelis for our loved one also is a concept of kavod ames. In addition to eliciting emotions for us, the therapeutic value of Shiva and everything that goes along with it, which could be, no one denies, maybe that should be the ikar in terms of bringing out, talking in the mitzvah, is talking about your loved one for 7 days. In fact, there's a prohibition of Hesach Hadash. You're not supposed to talk about other, it's very difficult to actually do in reality the way some shivas are set up. But, so therefore, but the point is to elicit Avelis Belev. But as Rashi points out, there's another aspect. That even if a person doesn't necessarily feel it, but there's an Avelis, there's a concept of kavod ames, that this for the sake of your parents, this for the sake of, in this case, the Churban Habayis, you do certain things, even if you don't necessarily have those feelings maybe one should have, but the fact that I'm willing to change my life, or whether it's 3 weeks, 9 days, Tisha B'Av, or I'm during Shiva, I'm going to go through the aspect of going through what the halacha mandates. That's also an honor of kavod ames, which also is a way of remembering your, the parents, the churban, in terms of giving kavod that way. So obviously, the ultimate goal is to try to actually feel, emotionally. It's easy when you're dealing with someone who's there, but it's much harder when you're dealing with something that we never had. So the ultimate goal is to bring out the churban. But on the other hand, even if we're not holding by that level, the mere fact that we come Tisha B'Av, come and say the kinos and fasting and go through the new, that itself is a cover to the Beis HaMikdash. We realize that normal life should be, that's why the Rav pointed out that by a regular Avel, there's a problem of excessive mourning, or as they quote the Rambam, Yoter Midai. But when it comes to the Beis HaMikdash, there is no, you could cry all you want, there's no excessive mourning, because when you lose, because when you lose a loved one, So that's natural, or at least, definitely when you lose a parent, not that it should happen, but that's the cycle of life. Usually you outlive your parents, so when you're mourning over your parents, that's, albeit it's not a happy situation, but that's a normal, and therefore you don't want to do too much because it looks like you're questioning God's judgment. But having a base, the relationship between the Jewish people and the base, that's a normal relationship. It's unnatural now. So to cry over something unnatural, like if you lost a child, that's unnatural. That there's there'd be more reason to. It's a much more of a tragic situation. So we're losing the base. We might not look at it that way, but part of it's a normal relationship to have a basis of Mikdash.
Yeah, but the point is, we never actually experienced.
Right. That just makes it harder. It doesn't change what the relationship should be.
It's interesting. There's an analogy which is not drawn here, which is with Pesach, because in Pesach you're supposed to imagine that you were actually there at the time of the.
Right, and that was the point.
And this is something which is missing from Tisha B'Av, which we were not asked to remember, to imagine that we were there at the time.
Right, but also what's interesting to note is, I was going to get to is, in past Jewish history, it was a lot harder for them, people who lived through the Holocaust pogroms, to feel the actual Chayris, freedom at a Pesach. That was very difficult for them to do. But to feel a Tisha B'Av was easy. Today we're in the opposite school. We could all relate to a nice Pesach Seder, but to actually feel the morning of Tisha B'Av, that's our child. Every generation has, because the Chesed of Hashem gave us a tremendous Golus. We have to remember Golus is also a punishment, and we have to, that's why it's much harder for us to feel. We don't want to turn the Onish into a reward.